In today's video, I want everyone to keep in mind that these individuals were in their late 30s. So this wasn't some type of situation involving idiot teenagers or a group of college kids who decided to push the envelope. And this situation as a whole has more red flags than an amusement park. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. And if an open conversation is something you prefer, then this is the place for you. Welcome to The Point. So let's talk about it.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Now, the premise of the story is these three individuals went over to a friend's house on January 7th to watch the Chiefs play the Chargers. And what happens between January 7th and January 9th has raised 1,000 questions, because it was on the 9th their bodies were discovered outside, and it is reported that these individuals froze and passed in their friend's backyard. And how were these three individuals discovered? Well, I'll play it for you right here.
One friend saying this man was inside his home alive while my friends were in his yard for Lord knows how long. They were all hanging out since after the game Sunday. He knew people were looking for them. He read messages of people searching for him on Tuesday. My husband banged on his door for 20 minutes. My friend banged on a door and then busted a window and yelled and announced her presence while she's inside, and still nothing from him. Then the cops come 10 minutes later and he comes out nonchalant in his boxers with an empty wine glass in his hand. Nothing is adding up. Dave, Clay, and Ricky need and deserve justice. They didn't deserve this.
We all do need to understand that we're in the fog of information at this point. Now, based off that Facebook post, if it's true, will we not make the assumption that this guy's just a moron? And if he's a moron, there is a possibility he would absolutely not be aware in any way, shape, or form that three of his friends are in his backyard. But if that individual is the individual I looked up, he's apparently a PhD student. He's apparently very well educated. And he also seems to have some sort of job that involves the development of vaccines to treat illnesses. But what did the attorney he hired have to say about him?
He's a highly educated guy. He's a good guy. He has a full-time job. In no way would he try to harm his buddies.
So the attorney references the fact that he's highly educated and he's employed. And because of those two factors, there's no way on this earth that he could possibly be a suspect. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to another highly educated and highly successful real estate agent. This is Todd Colehep. He's charged with the passing of several individuals in South Carolina and entrapping a female in a connex. So the notion that someone is educated and has a job and is productive and that excludes them from the possibility of being tied to a passing is absolutely ridiculous. Now let's play devil's advocate and line up a scenario here. Let's say that the individual who owns this home had his friends over, which apparently he frequently did, to watch this football game, and they put a few back and they have a good time, and he says, well, y'all typically stay the night, so just stay the night, do what you want, I'm gonna go on and go to bed. He wakes up the next morning, he's completely oblivious to the situation, he just assumes his friends are still passed out, and he lets them do what they're gonna do, and he focuses on his job. Maybe he has an at-home job. So the next logical question is, well, does he ever leave the home, and how often does he leave the home? Well, what does his attorney say about that?
But he was home sporadically.
So yes, the attorney says he leaves the home sporadically. So let's circle back to that scenario and say, okay, well, he woke up, he got ready for work, he saw his friend's car in the front yard, and he left and drove off to work. And we got to assume he came back at some point, correct? So if he came back at some point and still saw his friend's car, would that not be where we all start to have questions? To a degree, I think a lot of us within the first 12 to 18 hours can say, hey, look, maybe he just didn't realize it. But there are several hours past an acceptable range of time where people can say, all right, look, there's a car in your driveway. Unless investigators are trying to say that these individuals somehow all got dropped off at the home and there were no cars in the driveway. But the reports had said vehicles were found. So if vehicles are found in your home that belong to your friends, at what point is it an acceptable time to start reaching out to these individuals and saying, hey, when are you going to come get your car out of my driveway? Now, the other odd piece to this story, if it's true, is it reads like a scenario you would encounter when you have a group of individuals who are staying in a cabin in the woods. Because the weather at this time has it somewhere between the high 20s to the low 30s. And while yes, that's at freezing or below freezing, it's not anywhere near as cold as it typically gets in Kansas in the wintertime. But here we are with 3 individuals in the backyard. So did any of them have cell phones? And if they had cell phones in their possession, did law enforcement check those phones to see if they tried to make calls, if they tried to make an attempt to get out of the backyard? Not to mention that the backyard was fenced, and the homes in that subdivision looked fairly close together. So in a scenario where these individuals were trapped in a backyard, it should be completely feasible that at least one of them attempted to use their cell phone, right? And if they couldn't use a cell phone, why wouldn't they just climb over the fence? So what about this scenario is making sense? Because they're not in the middle of the woods. They're in a subdivision. And if they were in the backyard, would not at least one of them have made a scream to alert somebody in the home or somebody in the neighborhood that we were in the back and we couldn't get out and we needed to get inside because it was cold? We have a lot of these details that are being left out at this particular point. At this particular point, law enforcement has said there is no evidence of foul play. Now, they're either saying that because they checked these individuals, they checked the phone records, they found no sign of forced entry or an attempt to force entry into a home, or are they saying no foul play at this time because they just don't have enough evidence and they don't want their primary suspect spooked and potentially destroying evidence before they can get a warrant signed and gather that evidence? But what could cause a group of men in their late 30s to freeze in a barely freezing environment? The natural question would be, well, this is tied to substances. This is tied to some type of recreational medication, so to speak. And of course, we don't always want to assume somebody is doing something illegal when we have no proof to validate that. But I did come across an interesting article. Alan McGeeny, Clayton McGeany's cousin, said his relative had worked to better himself for the last decade, and he was on a good path, and he cared about that. Now, does this statement not set off a potential alarm here? Well, we're not saying any of these individuals did anything, but for him to make that particular statement, would it not indicate that at one point in time, maybe he was on the wrong path? Like a lot of people have done early on in their life. And if he was on the wrong path, how far off that path did he go? It sounds as if Clayton had made some changes, he was fixing things, and he was doing what he had to do to become a productive member of society and have a life he was proud of living. And generally speaking, when individuals do make those changes and they see those positive effects of those changes, it is less likely that they fall back into a path that caused them a lot of problems. But also, it's not impossible for people who have went on the right path to slip a little bit sometimes. So is there now not a scenario where those 3 individuals slipped a little bit? We have to, of course, wait on the toxicology report. And when that report comes out, I think it's going to shine a whole lot of light on this situation. Either A, something had happened, and maybe these 3 individuals had did some type of medicinal herb that had something else in it that caused them all to rapidly lose consciousness and freeze. Or maybe the toxicology will show nothing at all, which then of course leads back to that original question. How do 3 grown men find themselves in that scenario? It is simply a backyard. And 3 men in their late 30s could have easily gotten over a fence, or they could have easily broke into a door, unless there was an external factor that wasn't picked up in the toxicology report. Now, if it is true that the owner of the home ignored these phone calls, ignored these messages, ignored somebody beating on his front door and somebody breaking into his home, but comes down when law enforcement is there, then we have a lot of questions here. And at this particular point, all we are left with is questions. But to say the timeline doesn't make sense and the events surrounding those 3 individuals passing doesn't make sense is an absolute understatement. Not any bit of this story is lining up to anybody with a little bit of common sense. The attorney said he had no reason to go into the backyard, that the dog stayed at his father's house and that was at a separate location, fine. So even if he never went in the backyard, how did those three individuals get to his home? And if they got there by vehicle, would that vehicle not be in the front yard? And if that man does have his doctorate, he should have easily came to the conclusion that something was wrong when one of those vehicles were in the front yard. It has also came out that people are saying a U-Haul has been located in the driveway. Now, its exact purpose, if it's true, nobody knows. Maybe he's moving some stuff, selling some furniture, he's got a storage building. We'll have to wait and see. But it is certainly an absolutely odd situation. If you see any of these things differently, you can let me know down in the comments below. As soon as I catch an update, I'll let you know here or in the community post. Other than that, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here. Y'all stay safe. I'll catch you in the next one.